The pre-dawn darkness of Chicago pressed against the tall windows of the Millennium Grand Hotel. And somewhere in that darkness, Ethan Marshall was already awake. He had been awake since 3:47 a.m., the same time he'd woken every morning for the past 3 years.
This is
Not
completely
because of an alarm,
unacceptable.
but because
You
his
think you
body
can just
remembered.
ignore the rules.
It remembered
You
the
will fix
exact
this
moment the
right
phone had
now.
rung that night, the moment everything changed. Now at 5:00
Stop the
a.m., he
cart
pushed his
immediately.
janitor's cart through the marble lobby, the
Explain
wheels
what you are
squeaking
doing here.
softly against the polished floor. The sound echoed in the empty space, bouncing off crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen fireworks above. His hands, once insured for $1 million when he was the principal pianist for the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, were now rough from industrial cleaning chemicals. The calluses had changed. Where once they formed from hours at the piano keys, now they came from gripping mop handles and scrub brushes. The lobby was his domain at this hour. No guests, no staff, except for the night security guard who usually dozed at his desk, and no one to recognize him as the man who, 4 years ago, had played Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 to a sold-out crowd at Chicago Symphony Hall. That man was gone, buried with his wife Sarah in Graceland Cemetery on a rain-soaked Tuesday that smelled of lilies and regret. He was emptying a waste bin when he heard piano music drifting from the grand ballroom. Someone had left the sound system on, and through the speakers came Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. His hands froze. His breath caught. That piece, Sarah's favorite, the one she'd hummed while making breakfast, while brushing their daughter Grace's hair, while holding his hand in the ambulance after the seizure that would take her life. The mop handle slipped from his grip, clattering against the floor. The sound rang out like a gunshot in the silence. Ethan dropped to his knees, not in grief but in purpose, grabbing the handle and immediately beginning to clean a coffee stain that had been left by some late-night guest. His hands shook as he scrubbed the familiar motion, not quite enough to push away the memory of those same hands playing that exact nocturne at Sarah's funeral, while 8-year-old Grace stood silent beside the piano, already beginning her retreat into a silence that would last 3 years and counting. "You're here early, Marshall." The voice made him look up. Marcus, the night security guard, stood nearby with 2 cups of coffee from the machine in the break room. The older man's face, weathered by 70 years of Chicago winters, held a kindness that Ethan both craved and couldn't bear. "Couldn't sleep," Ethan said, accepting the coffee with a nod of thanks. "Grace," Marcus asked simply. "Drew all night. Went through an entire sketch pad." Ethan took a sip of the bitter coffee, welcoming the burn. "Same woman in every picture. Dark hair, always smiling. She's never drawn her mother, but this woman, she draws her obsessively. Started about 6 months ago out of nowhere." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Kids process things in their own way. "It's been 3 years, Marcus. 3 years since she's spoken a word. The doctors say there's nothing physically wrong. She just chose to stop. Like father, like daughter," Marcus said gently. "You chose to stop too, just in a different way." Ethan didn't respond. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said in the silence of his resignation letter from the symphony, in the job application for a janitor position, in the way he'd covered the piano in their apartment with a dust sheet and never looked at it again. By 6:30 a.m., the hotel was beginning to wake. The morning shift arrived, the kitchen started clattering with breakfast prep, and Ethan retreated to the lower levels, where he could work without being seen. This was his routine, his penance, his way of existing without living. At 7:45 a.m., he returned home to the small apartment in Pilsen, 10 blocks from the hotel. Grace was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table, with her colored pencils spread before her like a rainbow army. She didn't look up when he entered, didn't acknowledge his presence, except for the slightest tilt of her head that meant she knew he was there. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, kissing the top of her head. Her dark hair smelled of the strawberry shampoo he'd bought because it was the same brand Sarah used to buy. "What are you drawing?" She held up the paper. The same woman this time, standing in what looked like a doorway, arms outstretched. The woman wore something that looked like a robe, and there were strange symbols around her that Ethan didn't recognize. At the bottom of the page, Grace had written a date, January 15th, 6 months ago, when she'd first started drawing this mysterious woman. "She's beautiful," Ethan said, because what else could he say? "Is she from a dream?" Grace nodded, then pointed to a small detail he hadn't noticed before, a tiny airplane in the corner of the drawing, and next to it the letters NRT, which Ethan recognized as the airport code for Tokyo's Narita Airport. Is she coming from Japan? Ethan asked, surprised by the specific detail. Grace nodded again, then returned to her drawing. Ethan made breakfast: scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice. The same breakfast he made every morning, the same breakfast Grace ate in silence, the same breakfast that reminded him of all the breakfasts Sarah would never make again. They ate together in their shared silence, two souls adrift in an ocean of unspoken words. He walked Grace to school at 8:20 a.m. Pilgrim Lutheran School was 6 blocks away, and Grace knew the route by heart. She walked slightly ahead of him, her pink backpack bouncing with each step, her silence a bubble that seemed to keep other children at bay. At the school gate, she turned, looked at him with those brown eyes that were so much like Sarah's. It hurt, and almost smiled. Almost. "I love you, Grace," he said. She touched her hand to her heart, then pointed at him. Their signal. "I love you too, Dad." He watched her walk into the school, watched until she disappeared into the building, then walked back to the hotel for his 9 a.m. shift. The day manager, Victoria Barnes, would be there by now, and she would find something wrong with his work from the morning. She always did. The Millennium Grand Hotel lobby was buzzing with activity when he arrived. Business travelers checking out tourists, checking in the constant ballet of luggage and demands and credit cards. Ethan grabbed his cart from the supply closet and began his rounds, invisible in his gray uniform, just another part of the hotel's machinery. At 10:00 a.m., everything changed. A group entered through the revolving doors, and the atmosphere in the lobby shifted like the pressure drop before a storm. There were 6 of them, all Japanese, all impeccably dressed in dark suits except for the woman at the center. She wore a pearl gray suit that probably cost more than Ethan made in 6 months, and her black hair was pulled back in a style that was both severe and elegant. She moved with the kind of confidence that came not from arrogance, but from absolute certainty of purpose. The group approached the front desk where Victoria Barnes was holding court. Victoria, 45, divorced twice, bitter about both, stood straighter when she saw them coming. Her smile, painted in coral lipstick that was slightly too bright for her complexion, looked like it had been applied with a pastry bag. "Good morning, welcome to the Millennium Grand," Victoria said in her practiced hospitality voice. "Do you have a reservation?" The man beside the woman in gray, younger, nervous, stepped forward. "Yes, the reservation is under Yamamoto. The presidential suite for Ms. Yamamoto." Victoria's fingers clicked across the keyboard. "Ah, yes, I see it here. We'll need a credit card and identification." The younger man, who Ethan would later learn was named Kenji, produced both. As Victoria processed the check-in, she kept glancing at the woman in gray, clearly expecting her to speak. The woman, however, remained silent, her dark eyes surveying the lobby, with an expression that was neither impressed nor dismissive, simply observant. "And how many keys will you be needing?" Victoria asked, still looking at the woman. The woman said nothing. Victoria's smile tightened. "Ma'am, how many keys?" Still nothing. Kenji stepped forward again. "3 keys, please. Ms. Yamamoto prefers to handle her communications through me during this trip." Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly. "I see. Is there a problem? Does she not speak English?" "She speaks several languages fluently," Kenji said carefully. "She simply chooses when and how to use them." The tension at the desk was beginning to draw attention. Other guests in line were shifting, whispering. Victoria's face was starting to flush beneath her foundation. "Well, this is America," Victoria said, her voice carrying across the lobby. "If she wants to be served properly, she needs to communicate properly. We're not mind readers here." The woman, Ms. Yamamoto, exhaled softly. It wasn't a sigh of frustration or anger. It was measured, deliberate, like a conductor setting tempo. She turned slightly and her eyes swept across the lobby again, this time stopping on Ethan, who was cleaning a glass table 20 feet away. Their eyes met for just a moment, but in that moment Ethan saw something he recognized. It was the same look he saw in his own mirror every morning, the look of someone who had chosen silence, not because they had nothing to say, but because they had too much to say and no one who would truly listen. Victoria's voice rose higher. "This is ridiculous. If she can't even tell us her basic needs, how are we supposed to accommodate her?" This is a five-star hotel, not a guessing game. More people were watching now. The lobby had that quality that public spaces get when conflict is brewing, like everyone was holding their breath. Two security guards had moved closer, not intervening, but ready. "Ma'am," Victoria said, leaning forward, speaking slowly and loudly, as if volume would bridge whatever gap she perceived. "You need to speak English. This is America." That's when Ethan set down his cleaning cloth. He didn't know why he was walking toward the front desk. His legs moved without his conscious decision, carrying him across the floor, with the same involuntary certainty that used to carry his fingers across piano keys when the music took over. "Excuse me," he said quietly. Everyone turned. Victoria's face immediately hardened with irritation. "Mr. Marshall, this doesn't concern maintenance. Please return to your duties." But Ethan wasn't looking at Victoria. He was looking at Miss Yamamoto, and he saw in her eyes a flicker of curiosity. He bowed not deep but proper, the way his Japanese piano teacher had taught him 20 years ago. "Yokoso Yamamoto-sama," he said, his voice carrying the soft inflections of the Kyoto dialect. "Okusama wa ocha wa meshiagarimasu ka?" "Welcome, Miss Yamamoto. Would you care for some tea?" The lobby fell completely silent. Even the background music seemed to pause. Ms. Yamamoto's composure, which had been absolute, cracked just slightly. Her lips parted in surprise, and then for the first time since entering the hotel, she smiled. It was a small smile, barely there, but it transformed her face completely. "Arigato gozaimasu," she replied, her voice like silk. "Anata wa nihongo wo hanashimasu ka?" "Thank you. You speak Japanese." "Sukoshi," Ethan replied modestly. "Watashi no sensei wa Kyoto no kara deshita." "A little. My teacher was from Kyoto." Victoria's face had gone from flushed to pale. "You speak Japanese. You're a janitor." Ethan turned to her, his expression calm. "I'm a hotel employee helping a guest feel welcome. Isn't that what we're supposed to do?" Ms. Yamamoto spoke again, this time in perfect, unaccented English. "Your Japanese is excellent. The Kyoto dialect is particularly difficult for Americans to master." The entire lobby seemed to exhale at once. She could speak English. She had chosen not to. Victoria sputtered. "Then why didn't you just—" "Because, Ms." Yamamoto said, her voice still silk, but now with steel underneath. "Respect is not about language, it's about listening. Your employee understood that. You did not." She turned back to Ethan. "Would you be kind enough to help with our luggage? I would appreciate someone who understands the importance of careful handling." Victoria stepped forward. "Ms. Yamamoto, I must inform you that Mr. Marshall is maintenance staff. He's not authorized to handle VIP luggage or access the penthouse floors." "Then authorize him," Ms. Yamamoto said simply. "I cannot simply—" "Ms. Barnes, is it—" Ms. Yamamoto's assistant Kenji interjected. "Perhaps you should know that Ms. Yamamoto is not just a guest. She's the CEO of Yamamoto Hospitality Group. We're in Chicago for business matters." Victoria's face showed a flicker of concern, but she held her ground. "Nevertheless, there are protocols." Ms. Yamamoto looked at Ethan. "Mr. Marshall, was it? Would you join us?" Ethan glanced at Victoria, whose mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then he looked back at Ms. Yamamoto and made a decision that would change everything. "It would be my honor, Yamamoto-sama." As he walked around the desk to join them, he heard Victoria hiss, "This isn't over, Marshall. There are protocols. There are rules." But Ethan was already walking away, pushing the luggage cart toward the elevator with Ms. Yamamoto beside him. As the elevator doors closed, she spoke quietly in Japanese. "I knew who you were the moment I saw you," she said. "Ethan Marshall. You played in Tokyo 5 years ago. I was there." Ethan's hands tightened on the luggage cart. "That was a different person." "Was it?" she asked. "Or is he just hiding behind silence like I was down there?" The elevator rose smoothly toward the penthouse, and Ethan felt something shift inside him, like a door he'd locked 3 years ago was slowly, carefully being tested from the other side. In the penthouse suite with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, Ms. Yamamoto moved to her luggage and opened one of the cases. From inside, she pulled out a rolled poster, aged and carefully preserved. She unrolled it slowly, revealing a concert advertisement, Ethan Marshall live in Tokyo with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. This was the last concert my English teacher attended, she said softly. She spoke of it often in her final months. Ethan's breath caught. Your English teacher? Her name was Sarah Marshall. She taught me when I was at Northwestern University 10 years ago. Ms. Yamamoto, whose first name Ethan would learn, was Akiko, turned to face him. She was the only person who never laughed at my accent, who never made me feel small for struggling with pronunciation. The world tilted. Ethan reached for the wall to steady himself. You knew Sarah. She talked about you constantly, Akiko continued. The brilliant pianist husband she was so proud of. She showed me videos of your performances. She said you could make the piano speak languages that didn't have words. Ethan's legs gave out, and he sat heavily on the nearby sofa. She never mentioned teaching a Japanese student. I was just one of many students she tutored, Akiko said, sitting across from him. But she was the only teacher who saw me as more than just another foreign student struggling with English. She saw me as a person. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small photograph. It showed a younger Sarah, radiant and laughing, standing next to a younger Akiko in graduation robes. This was when I completed my MBA. She came to my graduation even though she wasn't officially my teacher anymore. Ethan took the photo with trembling hands. Sarah looked so alive, so vibrant. It was from before Grace was born, before the fights about his touring schedule, before the terrible morning she died. How did she die? Akiko asked gently. She had epilepsy we didn't know about. Ethan said the words like glass in his throat. We had argued that morning. I was leaving for another tour another month away. She said I cared more about strangers' applause than my own family's happiness. I said things. Terrible things. She drove off angry. 20 minutes later, she had a seizure while driving. The car hit a median. She died instantly. You blame yourself, Akiko said. It wasn't a question. The stress of our fight could have triggered it. The doctors said strong emotions can be a trigger for seizures in epileptic patients. If we hadn't fought, Grace hasn't spoken since the funeral, Ethan continued. 3 years of silence. She draws constantly the same woman over and over, someone I didn't recognize until today. The doctors say she's choosing not to speak, that it's psychological, not physical. My daughter chose silence, and so did I. I quit the symphony, became a janitor, tried to disappear. It's what I deserved. Akiko was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city stretching toward the horizon. When I returned to Japan after graduation, she said, I stopped speaking English for 2 years. Not because I couldn't, but because every English word reminded me of the people who had made me feel inferior, stupid, less than. But it also meant I couldn't remember Sarah's kindness, her encouragement, her belief in me. Silence can be a shield, Mr. Marshall, but it can also be a prison. She turned back to him. Your daughter draws a woman with dark hair. Ethan nodded. For the past 6 months. Always the same woman, always in different settings. Sometimes with Japanese characters around her. May I meet her? Why? Because Sarah wrote to me 6 months before she died. She was having headaches, strange episodes. She was scared. She made me promise that if anything happened to her, I would check on you and Grace. I've been trying to find the courage to keep that promise for 3 years. When I saw the hotel was for sale, I thought it might be fate giving me a chance. She pulled out an envelope from her purse, worn from being carried. She gave me this to give to you when the time was right. Ethan's hands shook as he took it, but he didn't open it. Not yet. The business meeting, he asked. Real but not urgent. I could have sent representatives. I came myself because I needed to keep my promise to Sarah. That evening, Ethan brought Grace to the hotel after her school. It was against every rule, but Victoria had been strangely absent all afternoon, and Marcus had simply winked when Ethan signed Grace in as a visitor. They found Akiko in the hotel's small library, a quiet room that most guests didn't even know existed. She had changed from her business suit into a simple blue dress, and her hair was down, softening her appearance considerably. Grace stopped in the doorway, her eyes wide. She looked at Akiko, then down at the sketchbook she was carrying, then back at Akiko. Slowly, as if in a dream, she opened the sketchbook and held up her latest drawing. It was the same woman she'd been drawing for months, but now Ethan could see it clearly. The woman was wearing a kimono. The symbols around her were Japanese characters. And in the corner, barely visible, was today's date. Then Grace flipped back through the pages, showing drawing after drawing, all dated. The earliest was from January, 6 months ago, before Akiko had even decided to come to Chicago. Akiko knelt down to Grace's level, studying the drawings with serious attention. Then she said something that made Ethan's world stop. "You've been drawing me before we met," Akiko said softly. Grace nodded. Then for the first time in 3 years, she spoke. "Sensei," Grace whispered. The first word she'd spoken in 3 years. "Teacher." Akiko's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she said softly. "Your mother was my sensei, and she told me if anything ever happened to her, I should find you and your father." She looked at the dates on the drawings again. January through July, each one showing her in different situations, different clothes, but always recognizable. "How?" Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Grace looked at him, and when she spoke again, her voice was rusty but clear. "Mom shows me in dreams. She said her friend needed us, and we needed her friend." As Ethan held his daughter, who had finally found her voice, and looked at Akiko, who had traveled across the world to keep a promise, a notification popped up on Kenji's phone. He looked at it, his face paling. "Ms. Yamamoto," he said urgently, "you need to see this." He held up his phone. On the screen was a video clearly taken that morning in the lobby. It showed Ethan speaking Japanese, showed Akiko's smile, showed Victoria's humiliation. The caption read, "Janitor, schools, Karen manager with perfect Japanese." Janitor, who listens, Shiana, respect, and viral. In 3 hours, it already had 2 million views. "This is going to be a problem," Kenji said. From somewhere in the hotel, they could hear Victoria's voice, shrill and angry, demanding to know who had posted the video. But in the quiet library, Grace had taken Akiko's hand and was drawing with her other hand, adding details to her picture. A piano, musical notes, and in the corner, barely visible, a small figure that looked like herself, no longer alone. And for the first time in 3 years, the Marshall family felt something that might have been hope. The video changed everything overnight. By morning, it had reached 8 million views and spawned countless reaction videos, memes, and think pieces about respect in the service industry. Janitor, who listens, was trending globally, and someone had already made t-shirts. But in the small apartment in Pilsen, Ethan sat at his kitchen table at 4 a.m., staring at the envelope Sarah had left with Akiko still unopened. Grace was asleep, but for the first time in 3 years, she had spoken before bed. Not much, just a "good night, Dad," in a voice rusty from disuse, but it had been enough to make him sob into his pillow after she'd gone to her room. Now in the pre-dawn darkness, with the city still sleeping outside, he finally opened Sarah's letter. The paper smelled faintly of her lavender hand cream, a detail that made his chest tighten with grief, so fresh it might have been yesterday. "My dearest Ethan and my sweet Grace," it began in Sarah's neat handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means Akiko found you, and it means I'm gone. I'm writing this because I've been having headaches, strange moments of confusion, episodes where I lose time. I saw a doctor last week without telling you. They suspect epilepsy but need more tests. I haven't told you, Ethan, because you have the Tokyo tour coming up, and this is your dream. I don't want to be the wife who held you back." Ethan's hands shook as he continued reading. "I've been teaching Akiko Yamamoto for the past year. She's brilliant but wounded, silenced by people who made her feel inferior. She reminds me of you, Ethan, when we first met at that dive bar on Division Street, when you didn't believe a kid from the South Side could play Carnegie Hall. Akiko has that same light hidden behind that same fear. If something happens to me, she's promised to find you. She owns hotels, Ethan. She's also one of the loneliest people I've ever met. She needs family. You and Grace might need her too." The next paragraph made him gasp. "I need to tell you something about the morning arguments we've been having. They're my fault. The headaches make me irritable, and I've been picking fights because I'm scared. I'm scared you'll cancel the tour for me. I'm scared of being the sick wife. If the worst happens, if that final argument sends me driving away in anger, please know it was never about you. It was always about the fear. And please, Ethan, keep playing. Grace needs to hear music again. She needs to know that silence isn't the only way to grieve. The letter was dated 1 week before her death. His phone buzzed. Marcus, you need to get here. Now. Victoria's called an emergency meeting. She's got the labor board here. Ethan folded the letter carefully, placed it in his chest pocket over his heart, and headed to the hotel. The walk through the pre-dawn streets of Chicago felt different now. For the first time in 3 years, he felt something besides guilt, the possibility that Sarah had forgiven him, even before there was anything to forgive. The hotel was in chaos when Ethan arrived at 5:30 a.m. Victoria stood in the employee break room, her face a mask of cold fury addressing the assembled maintenance and housekeeping staff. Beside her stood a man in a cheap suit holding a clipboard, obviously from the labor board, and another man in an expensive suit who could only be her lawyer. As you may have heard, she said, her voice dripping with venom, one of our employees has become an overnight sensation. Mr. Marshall here has decided that proper protocols don't apply to him. She turned to Ethan. You're suspended effective immediately pending a full review of your conduct. On what grounds? Marcus asked from the back of the room. Insubordination, violation of guest privacy protocols, and unauthorized access to restricted areas, Victoria replied, reading from a prepared statement. Mr. Marshall escorted guests to the penthouse without proper clearance. Furthermore, he disclosed his ability to speak Japanese, a skill not listed on his employment application, which constitutes falsification of records. That's ridiculous, said Lucia, one of the housekeepers. Since when is speaking an extra language a crime? Victoria's eyes narrowed. Since he used that hidden skill to undermine management authority. The door opened and Akiko entered dressed in a sharp black suit. Kenji followed along with 3 other people in expensive suits. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ms. Barnes, Akiko said coolly, I understand you're suspending the only employee who showed me genuine respect yesterday? Victoria straightened. Ms. Yamamoto, while we value your business staff discipline, is an internal matter. Not when I own 51% of this hotel, Akiko said calmly. The silence was deafening. Victoria's face went white. That's not possible. The sale isn't final until 10 minutes ago, one of Akiko's lawyers said, producing a tablet. The documents were signed electronically at 5:20 a.m. Chicago time. Ms. Yamamoto is now the majority owner of the Millennium Grand Hotel. Victoria's composure cracked. You can't just... This is impossible. The previous owners were quite motivated when we offered 20% above market value, Akiko said, especially after they learned about the numerous discrimination complaints against management that were never properly addressed. Victoria's lawyer stepped forward. This is clearly retaliation for yesterday's incident. No, Akiko said quietly. This is about transforming a hotel that has lost its way. Mr. Marshall simply reminded me why I got into this business, to create places where everyone feels welcome. She turned to address the room. Effective immediately, all staff will receive a 15% raise. We'll be implementing language training programs, and we'll be creating an employee council to ensure worker voices are heard. The room erupted in whispers and gasps. Lucia started crying. Marcus sat down heavily in a chair. Victoria grabbed her purse. You'll hear from my lawyers. I'm counting on it, Akiko replied. Oh, and Ms. Barnes, our IT department has documented your unauthorized access to personnel files at 2:47 a.m. this morning. That's both a violation of company policy and potentially a criminal offense. Victoria fled the room without another word. As the staff dispersed, many stopping to thank Akiko, Kenji's phone rang. He answered, his expression growing increasingly concerned. Ms. Yamamoto, we have a problem. The video has attracted media attention. Someone leaked Mr. Marshall's history to the press. They know about his career, his wife's death, about Grace's condition. There are news vans at her school. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. Grace, I have to get to Grace. Go, Akiko said immediately. Kenji, have our security escort him. At Pilgrim Lutheran School, Ethan found chaos. Reporters clustered around the entrance, and parents were gathered in worried groups. He entered through the side door and found Grace in the principal's office drawing quietly, while Principal Anderson paced nervously. Mr. Marshall, Principal Anderson said, relieved. We've been keeping Grace inside, but the reporters... They're calling her the silent child of the viral janitor. Ethan knelt beside Grace, who immediately wrapped her arms around his neck. Hey, sweetheart, we need to go. Grace pulled back and spoke, her voice small but clear. Are they here because of yesterday? Because you helped the lady? Yes, Ethan said, not wanting to lie. Is she really Mom's friend? The lady from my dreams? Ethan nodded. She was Mom's friend, and she wants to help us. They exited through the loading dock where Kenji waited with a black SUV. As they drove back to the hotel, Ethan's phone exploded with notifications. Former colleagues were reaching out, journalists were requesting interviews, and there were dozens of messages from people sharing their own stories of workplace discrimination. One message stood out from his former mentor, Maestro Chen. Ethan, I've seen the video. The boy who played Rachmaninoff like he was channeling the composer's soul doesn't just disappear. When you're ready, there's always a place for you here. Back at the hotel, they were escorted to the penthouse, where Akiko waited with an older woman Ethan recognized from business magazines, Helen Yamamoto, Akiko's mother. So you're the janitor who has my daughter risking a $500 million investment? Helen said, studying them with sharp eyes. Mother, please, Akiko began. I'm not criticizing, Helen said. She turned to Grace. May I see your drawings? Grace showed her the sketchbook page after page of Akiko drawn over 6 months. You drew my daughter before meeting her, Helen said. It wasn't a question. Grace nodded. Mom showed me in dreams. Helen was quiet for a moment, then pulled out her phone and showed Grace a photo from 12 years ago, Sarah young and vibrant, standing between Akiko and Helen at a graduation ceremony. Your mother saved my daughter's career, Helen said softly. Akiko was going to drop out. Sarah tutored her for free for 6 months, not just in English, but in confidence. She looked at Ethan. And now my daughter is trying to save you. The question is, will you let her? Before Ethan could respond, one of the suited assistants called out urgently, Ms. Yamamoto, you need to see this. On the laptop screen was Victoria Barnes, looking polished and professional, being interviewed on cable news. Systematic discrimination, Victoria was saying. I was terminated for maintaining professional standards. This is about a Japanese corporation taking over American businesses. The xenophobic dog whistle was loud and clear. We need to respond, Kenji said urgently. No, Akiko said firmly. We respond with truth. She turned to Ethan. It's time for a press conference. All of us. Grace too, Ethan asked protectively. Especially Grace, Helen said. That woman just made this about nationalism. We show them what it's really about: family kindness and the courage to speak. As they prepared, Grace tugged on Akiko's sleeve. Ms. Akiko, Mom says to tell you, speak your truth in your own voice. She says you'll understand. Akiko's eyes filled with tears. Those were the exact words Sarah had said to her 12 years ago. The press conference was held in the grand ballroom. Dozens of reporters filled the front row's cameras, creating a wall of lenses. Hotel employees gathered in the back showing support. Akiko stepped to the podium first. Before we address the accusations, I want to show you something. Shutter. The screen behind them lit up with a video from 12 years ago, a younger Akiko trying to give a presentation being laughed at when she mispronounced innovative. The young Akiko on screen froze, then walked off stage. That was my first MBA presentation at Northwestern, Akiko said. I didn't speak English in public for 2 years after that. The woman who helped me find my voice again was Sarah Marshall. The screen changed to show Sarah with Akiko and Ethan at her graduation. Sarah and Ethan came to support me, even though I was just one of dozens of students Sarah tutored. That's who they were. That's who Ethan still is. A reporter raised his hand. Ms. Yamamoto Victoria Barnes claims this takeover was planned specifically to install Mr. Marshall in power. Helen stepped forward. 3 years ago, my daughter began looking at this hotel because she received a letter from Sarah Marshall asking Akiko to look after her family if anything happened. Sarah knew she was sick. She knew her husband would blame himself and need help. Another reporter called out, but Mr. Marshall was working as a janitor. Ethan stepped to the microphone. Because I chose to be. I needed to be invisible. I needed to punish myself. Ms. Yamamoto didn't know I was here until yesterday. Why did you give up your career? A reporter from the Tribune asked. After Sarah died, every note reminded me of her. She used to sit in the front row of every concert, and when she was gone, all I could see was that empty seat. So I stopped playing. I stopped being Ethan Marshall, the pianist, and became Ethan Marshall, the ghost. And your daughter? Another reporter asked. Is it true she didn't speak for 3 years? Before Ethan could answer, Grace walked to the microphone. The room held its breath as the 8-year-old looked out at the sea of faces. My mom died when I was 5. The last thing she said to me was, I love you, little bird. I didn't say it back because I was mad. After she died, I was scared that if I spoke, I might say something else I'd regret. So I stopped talking. She paused, looking at Akiko. But yesterday when Miss Akiko stood in our lobby, and everyone was mean to her because she wouldn't speak English, I recognized something. She was choosing silence too, just like me. And when my dad stepped forward and spoke to her in her language, he showed me something important. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is break your own silence to help someone else break theirs. A reporter in the back called out, Ms. Yamamoto spent $500 million on what appears to be a personal vendetta. Helen laughed sharply. This hotel profited $12 million last year. Under my daughter's management, conservative estimate, $40 million. This isn't charity, this is business. How can you be so sure? The reporter challenged. Akiko took the microphone again. In 16 hours since the video went viral, we've received 3,000 booking requests. 27 corporations want to host diversity conferences here. 43 employees from other hotels have applied to work here. Victoria Barnes spent 3 years making this hotel a place where employees were afraid and guests felt judged. That's not just wrong, it's bad business. A CNN reporter raised her hand. What role will Mr. Marshall play going forward? That's up to him, Akiko said, glancing at Ethan. He's been offered any position he wants, including, well, we do have a beautiful Steinway piano in our lobby that hasn't been played properly in years. The room turned to Ethan expectantly. Grace slipped her small hand into his. Play Dad, she whispered. For Mom. 20 minutes later, the entire press conference had moved to the lobby. Reporters, guests, and staff formed a circle around the grand piano. Ethan sat at the bench, hands trembling. Grace stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder. Akiko stood on his other side. He placed his hands on the keys. For a moment, muscle memory tried to play Chopin, but he stopped. I can't, he whispered. Grace leaned close. Mom says to play her song, the one you wrote for her. Ethan's breath caught. He had written a piece for Sarah on their first anniversary. He hadn't played it since she died. His fingers found the opening notes. The melody started soft, tentative, then grew weaving in themes from their life together. As he played, tears ran down his face, but his hands never faltered. The music filled the lobby, drew people from their rooms. The reporters had stopped recording, stopped everything except listening. When the last note faded, the silence was absolute. Then Grace started clapping her small hands, making a sound that seemed enormous. Everyone rose to their feet and applauded. That evening in the penthouse, Ethan found himself with Akiko, Grace, and Helen. Grace was asleep on the couch, exhausted from the day. Kenji entered with his tablet. The response has been overwhelming. Victoria's narrative is dead. The video of Grace speaking has 10 million views. Comments are flooded with people sharing their own stories of loss and finding voice again. The most surprising message was from Maestro Chen. The Chicago Symphony Orchestra would like to commission a piece from you, a concerto about finding voice after silence. We'll premiere it next season with you as soloist. I can't. I'm not ready, Ethan said. You are, Akiko said softly. You proved that today. Grace stirred, opening her eyes. Dad, are we going to stay here? What do you want, sweetheart? Grace looked at Akiko, then at Helen, then back at her father. I want a family again, not to replace Mom, but to add to her memory. Ms. Akiko, you were Mom's friend. You're sad like us. Maybe we can be sad together until we learn to be happy again. Akiko knelt beside the couch, tears in her eyes. I would like that very much. As the night deepened and the city lights sparkled below, 3 broken people began the slow process of healing together, bound by the memory of a woman who had loved them all and had somehow, even in death, brought them together. 6 weeks had passed since the press conference that changed everything. The Millennium Grand Hotel had transformed from a place of cold efficiency to one of warmth and welcome. Every morning, Ethan still arrived early, but now he carried sheet music instead of cleaning supplies. He'd accepted the position of artist in residence, a role Akiko had created specifically for him, though he still insisted on helping Marcus with small maintenance tasks when needed, finding peace in the simple, honest work. This morning was different. As he entered the lobby at 6 a.m., he found Victoria Barnes waiting by the piano, holding a manila envelope. She looked smaller somehow, her trademark coral lipstick replaced with a neutral shade. Her aggressive posture softened by something that might have been humility. The early morning light through the tall windows cast long shadows, making her appear almost ghost-like. "Victoria," Ethan said carefully, "I thought you'd left Chicago." "I did, I came back." She held out the envelope with trembling hands. "My lawyer said I shouldn't do this, but I need to." Inside was a signed statement withdrawing all her legal claims and a personal check for $50,000. The check was worn at the edges as if she'd carried it around for days gathering courage. "I don't understand," Ethan said, genuinely bewildered. Victoria's voice was quiet, almost broken. "It's for Grace's college fund. It's it's what I would have wanted someone to do for my daughter if I'd been a better mother. If I'd been a better person." She paused, swallowing hard. "I don't have children. I pushed away everyone who might have loved me because I was so afraid of being seen as weak. Watching you and Grace, seeing how Miss Yamamoto looked at you both, it made me realize what I'd thrown away in pursuit of control." She turned to leave, then stopped. "That day in the lobby when you spoke Japanese, you didn't just help Ms. Yamamoto. You held up a mirror and I didn't like what I saw. I'm seeing a therapist now, learning to listen instead of just waiting for my turn to talk. Learning that power isn't about making others feel small." "Victoria, wait." Ethan set down the envelope. "Would you like to stay for coffee? Marcus makes a fresh pot around now." She looked surprised, then something in her face crumbled completely. "Why would you be kind to me after everything I did? The way I treated you, the things I said about your wife." "Because," Ethan said simply, "someone once told me that kindness multiplies, but only if we choose to pass it on." Sarah believed that even the hardest hearts could soften if given the chance. She was usually right about people. They sat in the lobby as the morning sun painted golden stripes across the marble floor. Marcus joined them, bringing his special Colombian blend that he usually reserved for himself. Then Lucia arrived early for her shift and sat down too. And by 7 a.m., what had started as an awkward conversation had become something resembling reconciliation. "I was so angry," Victoria admitted, holding her coffee cup like a lifeline. "My ex-husband left me for a younger woman who barely spoke English. I took it out on every non-native speaker I met. It was easier than admitting I was the problem in my marriage." "We all carry wounds," Marcus said gently. "The lucky ones find a way to heal instead of spreading the infection." At 8 a.m., Grace arrived with Akiko. They'd been staying in the penthouse suite while Ethan's apartment was being renovated, but it was becoming increasingly clear that the arrangement was more than temporary. Grace ran to Ethan, her backpack bouncing, her face bright with excitement. "Dad, Ms. Akiko taught me to write my name in Japanese." She pulled out a paper covered in carefully drawn characters. "And look, I drew Mom with Japanese and English words together, because Ms. Akiko said Mom lived in both worlds." The drawing showed Sarah standing on a bridge made of words 1 foot in each language, arms outstretched, as if conducting a symphony of cultures. Akiko approached more slowly, and Ethan noticed she was carrying an envelope similar to the one Sarah had left. Her usually composed face showed traces of worry. "What's that?" he asked, feeling his stomach tighten. "A letter from my board of directors," she said, her expression unreadable. "They're concerned about my emotional investment in this property. They want me to return to Tokyo immediately for an emergency shareholders meeting." Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. "Are you going?" Before Akiko could answer, Helen Yamamoto entered the lobby, followed by a group of Japanese businessmen in dark suits. The atmosphere shifted immediately, became formal and tense. The warm morning suddenly felt cold. "Akiko," Helen said in Japanese, then switched to English for Ethan's benefit. "The board has voted. If you don't return to Tokyo by tomorrow and resume your normal duties, they'll remove you as CEO." They believe you've lost perspective. Then I'll resign, Akiko said quietly without hesitation. The room went still. Even Grace stopped drawing her pencil suspended in midair. You'd give up everything you've built? Helen asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely surprised. 20 years of work. I'd be giving up nothing, Akiko replied, her voice gaining strength, if I lost the only real family I've found in 20 years. Money and power are just numbers on a screen if you have no one to share them with. One of the board members, a stern man in his 60s named Mr. Takahashi, stepped forward. Yamamoto-san, be reasonable. You're risking a billion-dollar empire for a hotel that barely turns a profit and… He glanced dismissively at Ethan and Grace. Personal attachments that cloud your judgment. Grace stood up, her small face serious. She walked directly to Mr. Takahashi and looked up at him without flinching. My mom used to say that some things are worth more than money, like family, like love, like being heard when the whole world wants you to be quiet. She also said that the saddest people are the ones who count their money instead of their blessings. Mr. Takahashi looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight. Another board member, a younger woman named Ms. Sato, was trying to hide a smile. Helen, however, was studying her daughter with an expression Ethan couldn't quite read. It was part pride, part calculation, part something else entirely. There is another option, Helen said finally, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been planning this conversation for weeks. The board's concern is that you're neglecting your other properties for this one. What if you weren't? What do you mean? Akiko asked, frowning. What if the Millennium Grand became our flagship property for a new initiative? A chain of hotels that prioritize human connection over corporate efficiency. We've had 300 inquiries from hotel owners wanting to adopt our empathy model since the video went viral. Another 100 from corporations wanting to send their executives here for sensitivity training. The board members exchanged glances. Miss Was, Sato pulled out a tablet and began running numbers, her fingers flying across the screen. The projected revenue from licensing our training programs alone could exceed $200 million in the first year, she admitted reluctantly. If we factor in the goodwill value and brand enhancement, $300 million, another board member interjected. Minimum. And, Helen continued, looking directly at Ethan with a small smile, we'd need someone to oversee the cultural transformation. Someone who understands both performance and service. Someone who's lived on both sides of visibility and invisibility. Someone who knows what it means to fall from grace and find redemption. Me, Ethan said, shocked. I'm not a businessman. I don't know anything about running hotels. No, Helen agreed. You're an artist. That's exactly what we need. Business we can teach. Humanity is much harder to learn. But the shareholders, Mr. Takahashi protested. The shareholders, Helen said firmly, will be thrilled when they see the projections. Ms. Sato, show them the analysis you've been working on. Ms. Sato connected her tablet to the lobby's display screen. Charts and graphs appeared showing viral reach, sentiment analysis, and revenue projections that made even the skeptical board members lean forward with interest. The Janitor Who Listens video has been viewed 47 million times across all platforms, Ms. Sato explained. The earned media value alone is worth approximately $15 million. Hotel bookings have increased 340%. Our stock price has risen 22% since the acquisition became public. Before anyone could respond further, the lobby doors burst open. Maestro Chen entered, followed by several members of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, all carrying their instruments. Behind them came what looked like a small army of musicians, journalists, and even some city officials. Forgive the intrusion, Chen said, bowing slightly to the assembled group. But we have a proposal that couldn't wait. He turned to Ethan, his weathered face creased with a smile. We want to hold a concert here in this lobby next month. The premiere of your composition, with all proceeds going to a new foundation for children who've lost their voice literally or figuratively. Grace would be our guest of honor. And Chen continued, pulling out a contract. We're offering you the position of composer in residence with the symphony. You could work from here, from this hotel, and perform when you're ready. No tours unless you want them. No time away from Grace. The city's deputy mayor, a woman named Patricia Coleman, stepped forward. The city of Chicago would also like to designate the Millennium Grand as a cultural landmark. The story of what happened here has captured the world's attention. We want to ensure it continues to be a place where cultures meet, where silence finds voice, where music heals. The board members were discussing rapidly in Japanese. Helen was smiling slightly, the expression of someone watching a carefully orchestrated plan come together. Akiko looked between Ethan and Grace, her eyes bright with unshed tears. It seems, Helen said finally, raising her voice to quiet the discussion, that this hotel has become something more than any of us expected. The board is willing to support Akiko's leadership provided she maintains oversight of all properties while based here in Chicago. I can do that from here, Akiko said quickly. With technology, I can run things from anywhere. And Chicago is actually more central for our North American expansion plans. And Mr. Marshall, Mr. Takahashi asked, though his tone had softened considerably. What role would he play in this new model? Grace tugged on Ethan's sleeve. Dad, tell them about your idea. The one you told me last night. Ethan hesitated, then spoke, his voice gaining confidence as he continued. I thought, what if we created a program where every hotel employee could learn an instrument, where guests could participate in music sessions, where the lobby piano wasn't just decoration, but a living, breathing heart of the hotel. Music is a universal language. It crosses all barriers. Music therapy, Akiko added, understanding immediately. For people like Grace who need a different way to communicate, for business travelers far from home, for anyone who feels unheard, for people like all of us, Helen corrected, who sometimes need to speak without words. Miss Sato was already typing. If we partner with music therapy organizations, we could qualify for healthcare reimbursements. Corporate wellness programs would pay premium rates. The revenue potential is extraordinary, Mr. Takahashi admitted, looking at the numbers on her screen. The board voted unanimously to support the initiative. That afternoon, as the business details were being hammered out in the conference rooms, Ethan found himself alone with Grace in the hotel's garden. She was drawing again, but this time the picture was different. It showed their family, but expanded. Ethan, Grace, Akiko, Helen, Marcus, Lucia, Victoria, Maestro Chen, and dozens of others, all connected by flowing lines of music notes. Dad, Grace said suddenly, I want to say something at the concert. About Mom. About how she brought us all together, even though she's gone. Are you sure, sweetheart? That's a lot of people. Probably thousands. Mom spoke to lots of people when she was alive, Grace said simply. I want to speak for her now. I want to tell them that love doesn't die. It just changes shape. That evening, as the sun set over Lake Michigan, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Ethan found himself at the piano, with Grace beside him and Akiko turning pages. They were practicing for the concert, but it felt like more than that. It felt like a new family finding its rhythm. There's something else, Akiko said quietly during a break in the music. Something I haven't told you. Ethan felt his heart skip, worried about more corporate complications. Sarah sent me more than one letter, Akiko continued. She sent me one every month for the last 6 months of her life. In the last one, she said something I didn't understand until now. She pulled out a worn piece of paper and read, Akiko, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you found Ethan and Grace. I know you'll want to help them financially, but that's not what they need most. They need someone who understands that grief is just love with nowhere to go. They need someone who can show them that love can find new places to rest. I think you need that too. Don't be afraid to love them. Don't be afraid to let them love you. Life is too short and too precious to waste on fear. She was matchmaking, Ethan said, half laughing, half crying. Even while she was dying, she was matchmaking. She was ensuring we wouldn't be alone, Akiko corrected. All of us. 1 month later, the lobby of the Millennium Grand was transformed into a concert venue. 300 chairs were arranged in a semicircle with the piano at the center. But demand had been so high that they'd also set up screens in the ballroom, the garden, and even outside on the street where another 1,000 people had gathered. The audience included everyone, hotel employees in their finest clothes, symphony patrons in elegant gowns, journalists from around the world, children from the newly established music therapy program, kids from the South Side where Ethan grew up, business executives from Tokyo who'd flown in specifically for the event. Victoria Barnes sat in the third row, having become a regular volunteer, at the music therapy program. She discovered she had a gift for working with traumatized children, perhaps because she understood what it meant to armor oneself against the world. Ethan sat at the piano wearing a simple black suit rather than formal concert attire. Grace stood beside him in a dress that Helen had designed incorporating both American and Japanese elements, cherry blossoms embroidered on navy silk, with silver musical notes along the hem. Akiko sat in the front row holding Helen's hand wearing the ring Ethan had given her the night before, when he'd finally asked the question and Sarah had predicted in her letters. "Before we begin," Ethan said to the audience, his voice carrying through the sophisticated sound system that had been donated by a moved tech billionaire who'd seen the viral video, "My daughter would like to say something." Grace walked to the microphone, her small figure dwarfed by the grand space, but her presence filling it completely. She looked out at the sea of faces, took a deep breath, and began. "3 years ago, my mom died, and I stopped talking because I was afraid of saying the wrong thing. I was afraid that my words had power to hurt because the last thing I said to her was, 'I don't want eggs for breakfast.' That's it. Not 'I love you,' not 'drive safe,' just 'I don't want eggs.'" She paused, and the silence in the room was absolute. "For 3 years, I lived in silence, drawing pictures of a woman I saw in my dreams. I didn't know who she was, but she felt familiar. She felt like safety. Then 6 weeks ago, that woman walked into our hotel, and my dad recognized her pain because it looked like ours. He spoke to her in her language, not just Japanese, but the language of understanding, of being seen, of being heard." She looked at Akiko, who was crying openly now, not caring that hundreds of people were watching. "My mom knew she was sick. She knew she might die. So she made sure that the people she loved would find each other. She couldn't give us more time with her, but she gave us each other. That's what love does. It connects people even when they think they're alone. It builds bridges across silence, across languages, across death itself." Grace walked back to Ethan, but before they could begin playing, she turned back to the microphone. "Oh, and Mom, if you're listening, I want eggs for breakfast now. Miss Akiko makes them just like you did with cheese and chives and love." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Ethan and Grace began to play together. The piece, Conversations in Silence, started with just the piano, a simple melody that seemed to ask a question. Then Grace's voice joined in, sometimes singing wordlessly, sometimes speaking fragments of Sarah's letters in a rhythm that matched the music. "Dear Ethan, music is your first language. Dear Grace, your voice matters even when you can't find it. Dear Akiko, thank you for seeing my family when I no longer can." Halfway through, something unexpected happened. Akiko rose from her seat and walked to the microphone. She hadn't planned this, hadn't rehearsed, but she began to speak, alternating between English and Japanese, her voice weaving through the music. "Sarah taught me that accent is just the music of our mother tongue singing through our second language. She taught me that silence can be powerful, but it shouldn't be permanent. She taught me that family isn't just about blood, but about choice." Then one by one, others began to stand and add their voices. Marcus spoke about finding purpose in protecting others. Lucia sang a Mexican lullaby that reminded her of home. Victoria, trembling but determined, spoke about the cost of building walls instead of bridges. Even Mr. Takahashi, surprising everyone, shared a haiku about finding profit in unexpected places. The music built to a crescendo that seemed to fill not just the lobby, but the entire building, the entire block, maybe the entire city. Then it gradually softened to a single note that Ethan held while Grace spoke the final words. "My mom said that love multiplies." She was right. It multiplied from her to Ms. Akiko, from Ms. Akiko to us, from us to everyone here. That's the conversation in silence, love speaking when words aren't enough. The applause was immediate and thunderous. People rose to their feet, applauding not just the performance, but what it represented: the possibility of redemption, the power of connection, the hope that we're never as alone as we think we are. After the concert, as people mingled and shared their own stories of loss and recovery, transformation, and hope, Ethan found himself on the outdoor terrace with Akiko. The city sparkled below them, and the lake stretched out like dark silk, reflecting the stars that were just becoming visible in the clear night sky. "Sarah would be proud," Akiko said softly, her hand finding his. "She knew, didn't she? Ethan replied. Somehow she knew we'd need each other. Or maybe, Akiko suggested, leaning against his shoulder, she just knew that love doesn't end with death. It just finds new forms. Grace appeared in the doorway, her face bright with excitement. Dad, Ms. Akiko, Grandma Helen wants to know if you're ready. Ready for what? Ethan asked, though he suspected he knew. For the surprise, Grace said, grinning mischievously. They followed her back inside to find the lobby transformed once again. The chairs had been cleared, replaced with round tables, decorated with cherry blossoms and lilies. A small platform had been erected where the piano stood. The entire hotel staff was there, along with the orchestra members and many of the concert guests who'd been secretly invited to stay. Helen stood on the platform holding a microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, in my culture, when two families become one, it's celebrated with witnesses from the community. Ethan and Akiko don't know this, but everyone here tonight has been invited to witness something special. Mother, Akiko said, though she was smiling, what are you doing? Something Sarah asked me to do in her last letter to me, Helen replied. She pulled out an envelope, worn and carefully preserved. She wrote, if Akiko and Ethan find each other, if they find love, don't let them overthink it. Life is too short and too precious to waste on fear. Help them be brave the way they've helped others find courage. Maestro Chen stepped forward with a small box. Ethan, 3 years ago, Sarah came to me. She was sick but hadn't told anyone yet. She asked me to keep this for you, to give it to you when you were ready to live again. Inside the box were 2 rings, Sarah's wedding ring, and another ring inscribed with musical notes that when played formed the melody of Conversations in Silence. She had this made for the woman who would help you heal, Chen explained. She said you'd know when you met her. Ethan looked at Akiko, who was crying and laughing simultaneously, her professional composure completely abandoned. This is crazy, Ethan said, but he was smiling. Yes, Akiko agreed, wiping her tears. We've only known each other 2 months. Yes, but Sarah knew you for years. Yes, and Grace has been drawing you for 6 months. Yes. Grace tugged on both their hands. Are you going to keep saying yes, or are you going to actually say yes? The room erupted in laughter, breaking the tension. Ethan turned to Akiko, fully taking her hands in his. I'm not asking you to marry me tonight, but I am asking, would you consider becoming a family officially, the 3 of us? And he glanced at Helen. Anyone else who wants to join this beautiful chaos? 4, Helen corrected immediately. I've already put an offer on a condo 2 blocks away. Someone needs to teach Grace proper Japanese and ensure you 2 don't forget to eat when you're composing. 5, Marcus called out from the back, raising his coffee cup. Every family needs a grandfather who makes decent coffee. 6, Lucia added, laughing, and an abuela who actually knows how to cook. 7, Victoria said quietly, surprising everyone. If you'll have me, every family needs someone who's learning to be better. Soon the entire room was calling out numbers, claiming their place in this unconventional family that was forming around shared pain and newfound joy. Akiko looked around at the gathered crowd, then at Grace, then at Ethan. Yes, she said simply. Yes to all of it. Yes to the chaos and the music and the silence and the words. Yes to being a family that doesn't fit in any traditional box. Yes to loving Sarah's memory while building something new. Just yes. 6 months later, they were married in a ceremony that reflected everything they'd become. It was held in the hotel garden at sunset with cherry trees that Akiko had imported in full bloom. Grace was the ring-bearer flower girl, an officiant's assistant, having insisted on having multiple roles because that's what family does, they show up in all the ways needed. The ceremony was conducted in 3 languages, English, Japanese, and music. Ethan played a piece he'd composed for Akiko called Finding Home, while she sang a traditional Japanese love song her grandmother had taught her. Grace read a letter she'd written to Sarah telling her about their new family and promising to take care of each other. Mom, Grace read, her voice clear and strong. We did what you asked. We found each other. We built a family from broken pieces. It doesn't look like the family I started with, but it's beautiful in its own way. like a stained glass window made from shattered parts, creating something new when the light shines through. Victoria, who had become something of a surrogate aunt to Grace, played violin, a skill no one had known she possessed until she'd shyly offered. She played Sarah's favorite song, the one she used to hum while cooking, and for a moment everyone could feel Sarah's presence in the garden. Marcus walked Akiko down the aisle, having insisted that someone needs to make sure you don't trip on that fancy dress. Helen officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion, delighting in the unconventional nature of it all. The reception was a celebration of cultures converging. There was sushi and Chicago deep dish pizza, sake, and local craft beer, traditional Japanese dancing, and Chicago blues. The hotel staff, who had become extended family, took turns sharing stories of transformation, of finding voice of learning to listen. But the most poignant moment came during the father-daughter dance. Ethan and Grace took the floor first, dancing to a recording of Ethan playing Conversations in Silence. Halfway through, Grace gestured to Akiko, who joined them, and the three of them danced together, a new family finding its rhythm. As the evening progressed, Ethan found himself standing with Chen, watching Akiko teach Grace a traditional Japanese dance, while Helen and Marcus argued good-naturedly about coffee versus tea. Sarah would be happy, Chen said quietly. I used to think I was betraying her by finding happiness again, Ethan admitted. No, Chen said firmly. You're honoring her by living fully, by loving freely, by teaching Grace that hearts can expand, not just break. Later, as the celebration wound down and guests began to leave, Ethan found a quiet moment with Victoria, who was helping clean up, having insisted she didn't want to be just a guest, but part of the working family. Thank you, he said simply, for what I was horrible to you, for being brave enough to change, for showing Grace that people can grow, for becoming part of this strange, beautiful family we're building. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. I spent so many years building walls. Thank you for showing me how to build bridges instead. The hotel had continued to transform in the months following the concert. The music therapy program had expanded to serve over 200 children. The empathy training program for corporations had a 6-month waiting list. The lobby piano was never silent, with scheduled performances, impromptu concerts, and therapy sessions, filling the space with music from dawn to midnight. The Yamamoto Hospitality Group had launched the Listen First initiative across all their properties, with Ethan serving as creative director and Akiko as CEO. They'd proven that compassion and profit weren't mutually exclusive, that businesses could thrive by putting humanity first. But more importantly, in the penthouse that had become their home, a family had formed. Grace had her own room decorated with her artwork, a perfect blend of American and Japanese influences. Helen had a suite next door, close enough to be involved, but with enough space for independence. Even Marcus and Lucia had apartments in the building, the hotel having become not just a workplace, but a true community. On their wedding night, as Ethan and Akiko stood on the terrace, looking out at the city lights, Grace asleep in her room after the excitement of the day, Akiko pulled out one final letter from Sarah. I've been saving this for tonight, she said. The letter was addressed to both of them, though written years before they'd met as a couple. Dear Ethan and Akiko, it read, if you're reading this together, then my deepest hope has come true. I knew I was sick. I knew my time was limited. But I also knew that the two people I loved most besides Grace would need each other. Ethan, Akiko understands your silences because she has her own. Akiko, Ethan understands your need to be heard because he speaks in music what others say in words. Take care of each other. Take care of Grace. Build the family I couldn't stay to be part of. Love freely, love fully, and know that somewhere, somehow I'm watching and I'm at peace. All my love, Sarah. She knew, Ethan whispered, holding Akiko close. She loved us enough to ensure we wouldn't be alone, Akiko replied. From inside, they heard Grace call out in her sleep, not in distress but in contentment, mumbling something about tomorrow's piano lesson with Dad and Japanese lesson with Mama Kiko. The city hummed below them, thousands of lives intersecting, separating, reconnecting. Somewhere out there, other people were struggling with loss, with silence, with the fear of being unheard. But here in this hotel that had become a beacon of hope, three broken people had found wholeness in each other. The piano in the lobby played on, sometimes touched by professional hands, sometimes by children, just learning sometimes, by guests who needed to speak without words. It had become the heart of the hotel, beating out rhythms of healing, of hope of home. And in the penthouse above, a new family settled into sleep, held together by the memory of a woman whose love had transcended death itself, proving that some bonds are too strong for even mortality to break. The last entry in Grace's diary that night read, "Today, Mama Kiko and Dad got married. My first mom was there too, in the cherry blossoms, in the music, in the way everyone smiled. I have two moms now, one who gave me life and one who helped me find my voice. Both teach me that love doesn't divide when you share it. It multiplies. Tomorrow, Mama Kiko is going to teach me to write family in Japanese. Dad says it's written with the characters for house and tribe. That's what we are now, a house full of people who choose to be each other's tribe. Thank you, Mom Sarah. We're okay now. More than okay, we're family." As the night deepened and the hotel settled into quiet, the security cameras captured something odd, a shimmer of light near the piano, a brief impression of someone sitting at the bench, fingers poised over keys that played no sound, but seemed to conduct the silence itself into something beautiful. By morning, a single cherry blossom petal would be found on the piano bench, though the trees in the garden had finished blooming weeks ago. But that was a mystery for another day. Tonight, the Millennium Grand Hotel stood as a testament to the power of listening, to the strength found in vulnerability, to the families we choose, and the ones that choose us. And somewhere in the space between sound and silence, between loss and love, between ending and beginning, Sarah's greatest composition played on the symphony of lives intertwined, of love that multiplies, of conversations that need no words to be heard.